Welcome to this week's Riks Europe Round Up. In the panel today, as always, Elias Nordgren and Peter Kleppe. Welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Today we'll be talking about the bureaucrats that get a 7th pay rise since 2022, the Erdogan coup, and European NATO plan dismissed as politics. So let's get on with it. We'll start with the bureaucrats getting the 7th pay rise since 2022. Peter Kleppe, it's self-explanatory perhaps, but can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so it's basically hopeless. EU officials are well paid, and I think you can even justify that. There's probably way too many of them. They are probably doing all kinds of things they should not be doing. From my view, they should be making it easier to buy a car in another European country, to buy an insurance in another European country, not come up with all kinds of plans to centralize control using COVID or now the Russian threat for that. But yeah, you could make the case that if you want good people, you have to pay them well. But then, if you look at the salaries, it's not just well paid. It's astronomical. There's a very high degree of job security. I mean, I know that around 2/3 of bureaucrats, they get like a X% permanent expat allowance. So you're an expat forever. Whereas, I mean, I don't know if somebody, like, let's say, moves to Sweden, yeah, maybe his company will pay this person for a short period an expat fee, but of course not for the rest of their life. And so all these arrangements you still have in the European Commission. To be fair, these are difficult to examine, and you have to lobby to get a permanent position. But, I mean, we know that the European economy is suffering, partially due to green policies introduced by the same bureaucrats. We know that there's lots of inflation, also because of the ECB's, the European Central Bank's money printing. So then surely you would expect a little bit of solidarity from the bureaucrat side, but that's unfortunately not visible.
Yes, and as Peter was implying, I mean, this is an illustration of how the Brussels bubble is accumulating more and more competencies. So that it sort of justifies why they're getting a higher wage, because they're doing a lot more work. But it's also work that they shouldn't really be doing for the good of Europe. As Peter was also saying, obviously they should be working to trying in improving the European standard of living and not their own personal standard of living. Obviously, this is a moral failure that from the European Union, the Brussels elite, that I think will. I mean, it just sort of shows their bad character in these times that we're living in, and just that they're, in general, not the leaders that we need or want for our particular challenges in Europe right now.
And then moving on to the Erdogan coup. So over 15 million people voted in the primary elections just very recently to pick a presidential candidate for Turkey's opposition party, CHP, the Republican People's Party. And 13.2 million people voted for, I'm not sure if I'll pronounce his name correctly, but Ekrem Imamoglu. Not an easy name to pronounce for a European, but the mayor of Istanbul, and he's currently in jail. And this happened just days before the vote, I understand, and people say it's politically motivated. So, Peter, can you tell us more about this? What's happened?
Yeah, in a way, Turkey is not Europe. Many people will say, even if a tiny part of it is actually on the European continent. But Turkey is a member of NATO. It's a candidate member state for the European Union. And, whether we like it or not, it's an important strategic partner for the West. Now, the importance of Turkey has only increased because, of course, of the war in Ukraine. But partially, I think because of that, President Erdogan, who's sort of the authoritarian president of Turkey, he seems to have decided that this is the moment. Everybody is sort of distracted by Trump and his trade wars and by Ukraine. So let's now try to basically arrest my main political opponent. Now, Erdogan is some kind of an Islamist, maybe Islamist light, but certainly authoritarian. His opponent is a secular Turk from the party of Kemal Atatürk, who has founded the modern Turkish state on the premise that religion should know its place. And in that world, there's the position of the Turkish army, which is still to this day very independent. Erdogan cannot easily control them. So what we see is that the opposition is now, of course, hosting massive protests against the fact that Erdogan is locking up his main opponent. And if you look at the opinion polls, that main opponent, he's actually quite likely to win. The Turks are not happy with Erdogan. There's way too much inflation. He's printing money. Also, we should not underestimate sort of the immigration skepticism in Turkey. The fact that 4 million or more Syrian people have moved to Turkey, and many people on the secular side have accused Erdogan of sort of using these people as potential, voting support. So, I mean, that's sort of the background of it. It's going to be very tricky, I think, the situation. You can come up with very positive scenarios that Erdogan would voluntarily leave Turkey and go in exile. He's quite old already also. And I think his days are numbered as a politician. Anyway, unless he does the authoritarian thing. But of course, you could also think of civil war in the worst case of scenarios. Let's absolutely not predict that this will happen. I'm pretty sure we're still very far from that. But the protests are very heated, and this is really something that I think Europe should follow a lot more closely than it is.
I think there's two interesting things going on with this particular situation. One is that, I mean, Erdogan, when he was first elected president in, I believe, 2002, he was sort of hailed as a liberal icon, sort of, in the eyes of the European elite, who actually, this is probably when the ideas of Turkey becoming a member of the European Union were most likely, they were sort of envisioned at that point, because Erdogan ran on a fairly liberal platform, a fairly modern platform that was probably quite compatible to what most Europeans expected from their politicians. Now, 2 decades later, we see a completely different kind of man in Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So it's been kind of this effect of this slowly boiling frog, that he became one of the top politicians in Turkey through democratic elections, but now he's slowly turning the country back to some sort of Islamic vision. I mean, as Peter said, he's not really an Islamist. He's a sort of semi-Islamist in many senses. But it's just a betrayal of what people thought he was originally. And it sort of mirrors actually a little bit the perspective that Europe has had on the Islamic world in general. They thought that this part of the world was going to become just as liberal, just as free, secular, and humanistic as Europe is. But obviously that has not been the case. All of the democracies in Iraq, for example, all of these experiments with trying to introduce democracy into the Middle East have utterly failed. So I'm not surprised that this is what actually is happening also in Turkey, when you have a very religiously motivated, probably Islamist part of the population in Turkey that obviously is going to support these kinds of political movements that Erdogan is now the face of. And the other interesting thing about this is that the Ekrem Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul, he sort of represents this more European side of politics, almost literally, because Istanbul is on the what one might call the European side of Turkey, being on the European continent as opposed to being on Anatolia in Asia. So it's sort of like geographic and cultural conflict that is coming to a head when Erdogan is actually arresting potentially the most European of the top Turkish politicians. It's sort of an illustration of how the more Islamic Turkey is overcoming the more Europeanized, the more secular, and perhaps more liberal Turkey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, this was always one of my arguments to express some optimism about Turkey, to compare them with Russia or so typical Middle East dictatorships like Iran. where it's not conceivable that you would have the mayor of an important city being an opponent of the regime. That's not conceivable in Russia or Tehran, right? That the mayors there would be opponents to the regime. But it was the case until very recently in Turkey. And that's why these developments are so important. And yeah, I can only hope that, as you say, Elias, the European-oriented Turks get the upper hand here.
Moving swiftly on to our third topic, European NATO plan dismissed as politics. Senior military sources dismissed the plan, telling The Telegraph that Sir Keir had got ahead of himself. Peter, can you tell us about this?
Yes, so the reaction by European leaders to Donald Trump's plan for Ukraine has been to try to come up with an alternative in case America basically pulls out. That's sort of at least the way that European politicians are trying to present it. Starmer and French President Macron, they're communicated that they are working on some kind of a peace force to be sent to Ukraine, despite the fact that the United States have at least made clear that they are not willing or not yet willing to provide military backup to such a peace arrangement. Also, Russia has said, look, we don't want to accept NATO troops on Ukrainian territory, and therefore we also do not want to accept troops from NATO countries under some kind of a peace corps label. Now, The Telegraph, as you said, Rebecca, has quoted and interviewed some military officials, and they completely dismiss this plan. They say, look, I mean, Russia has, if even this thing materializes, Russia has 10 to 15 times more soldiers there in that area around. So if there would be clashes, there's no chance that this, that these Western soldiers would be able to withstand it, which is, of course, the reason why they would not be sent in the first place. It will be very tricky to get Russia to agree to this and the US to agree maybe some indirect support. So it's all a bit pie in the sky without the United States. And it's just it's just more evidence that you have European politicians talking and grandstanding. But then when you ask somebody who knows about military affairs, people in the field, they immediately unmask this as a political charade.
Exactly, and that's probably what can be seen with most of the pursuits that Europe is undertaking right now. We see the same type of religiosity, essentially, with regards to the green transition, with regards to whatever economic reforms that Europe needs to do, with regards to migration, at least how it was believed up until the last couple of years, that Europe will be able to handle whatever challenges would come from immigration, the mass migration that we've had. And the European elite is so, they believe they are capable of everything, and that's sort of the problem. They have all of these powers and they have all of these resources at their hands, and they just believe that there's nothing that they're not able to do. They believe that Europe is going to be able to substitute the United States as the sort of the military police, or the world police sort of in its general area. That's obviously not going to happen because we don't have the manpower, the resources, nor the ambition, I think, of the European population to actually enact that role. And this is just the most recent of these failures to try to make some sort of grandstand, military grandstand against Russia, which is ideologically motivated at this point. It's very important for the current European leadership to be able to put something up against Russia, which they've been pointing out, tweeting as the ultimate enemy for such a long time. And it's all just coming crashing down because we're run by imbeciles. Frankly, we're just run by idiots who can't really do all of these things that they're hoping that they're able to do.
Thank you very much for your insight today. That's all we have time for.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you as always for watching Riks Europe.